There is a subtle, almost imperceptible moment when desire transforms into something deeper. When a man begins to fall in love, he does not surrender immediately. Instead, something within him, often unconscious, initiates a silent process of evaluation. He tests, not out of malice but out of fear, out of self-protection, and above all, out of a visceral longing for truth. Those tests, often bewildering, reveal far more about the unconscious than about reason. Every strange gesture, every sudden silence, every approach followed by withdrawal, all of it has a purpose that goes beyond the obvious. In this video, we will dive into the deepest aspects of these tests, understanding their roots in the light of Carl Jung's psychology. If you've ever wondered what really lies behind those behaviors, this content will surprise you. Leave a comment. I choose to connect with love's hidden truth. Within Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the process of falling in love goes far beyond superficial attraction. When a man starts to connect emotionally, he is driven by archetypes and unconscious patterns that shape his behavior. One of the most relevant elements in this context is projection. Jung teaches that we project onto the other aspects of ourselves that we have not yet recognized or integrated. When falling in love, the man may project onto his partner the image of the anima, the inner feminine archetype, seeking in the relationship not just affection, but a reconnection with forgotten parts of his psyche. However, the fear of loss, vulnerability, and disillusionment activates the shadow, the hidden, repressed side of personality. It is at this point that the tests emerge. They are unconscious manifestations of the shadow in conflict with the desire to surrender. When he tests, he unconsciously wants to know whether his partner can bear his hidden truth, whether she can love not only his light, but also his shadows. The stage of individuation also comes into play. For a man, falling in love is an invitation to self-knowledge. Testing becomes a rite of passage between superficiality and depth. He wants to know if he can be whole in front of the other, if it is possible to transcend the ego and enter an authentic bond. Thus, these tests are not merely emotional games, but symbolic expressions of the unconscious seeking safety and truth. Understanding this through a Jungian lens allows us to interpret the signs with greater wisdom and less judgment, creating space for more conscious and transformative relationships. When a man begins to fall in love, he is connecting not only with the real woman in front of him, but also with an internal, deep, unconscious image, the anima. For Jung, the anima is the feminine archetype in the male psyche. She represents the collection of feminine aspects he carries in his unconscious: sensitivity, intuition, empathy, receptivity, that are seldom fully conscious. When he encounters a woman who awakens these contents, he feels something beyond the physical or rational. It is as if something in him is completed, as if he sees in her a lost piece of himself. But this experience is as powerful as it is dangerous for the structure of the masculine ego, because by projecting the anima onto his partner, he risks confusing the real woman with the idealized image. It is at that moment that the tests begin. Unconsciously, he starts to observe, provoke, and evaluate, to understand whether what he feels is real or merely an archetypal illusion. Testing is therefore a confrontation between the internal image and external reality. The man is not solely evaluating the woman, but probing whether the image of the anima she awakens stands up to the realities of everyday life, conflicts, and frustrations. These tests can take very subtle forms: a veiled provocation, an ambiguous remark, a sudden distancing. Often he watches how she reacts to rejection, doubt, or silence. What he is unconsciously seeking is evidence that she sustains something beyond the initial enchantment, whether she can welcome the vulnerability he has not yet acknowledged in himself. At the same time, a woman who is unaware of these archetypal processes may become lost between expectation and frustration. She senses she is being tested, but doesn't quite understand why, and it is here that consciousness becomes crucial. When she realizes she is facing not only his conscious actions, but also a symbolic dance between archetypes, she begins to act with greater presence and less reactivity. She stops trying to prove her worth and instead sustains her own truth, regardless of his response. Projection of the anima can also lead the man to demand impossible perfection from the woman. He expects her to be understanding yet firm, intuitive yet rational, sweet yet independent. These paradoxes stem from his own internal fragmentation that he has not yet integrated. The test, in this sense, exposes the conflict between the desire to surrender and the fear of losing control. Only when a man begins to recognize that the woman before him is not his anima, but a human being with lights and shadows, can he embark on a true relationship. And that recognition is only possible when he understands that the test is not a tool of control, but a mirror of his own inner quest. Therefore, the tests are not at their core signs of manipulation or emotional games. They are expressions of an unconscious in motion, trying to find a balance between the desire to love and the fear of losing oneself. When a woman sees this process clearly, she can decide more consciously whether she wishes to remain in that bond, not out of insecurity, but out of true awareness. At the moment, the feeling of love begins to emerge. A man finds himself in unknown territory. No matter how much he wishes to surrender, there are conflicting forces pulling him in opposite directions. One of these forces, described by Jung as the shadow, manifests strongly at this stage. The shadow represents all that he does not recognize or accept in himself: fears, insecurities, traumas, repressed desires, old grievances. And when passion grows, the shadow responds, almost like a defense mechanism. For many men, the start of passion is a time of emotional disarray. They feel their heart opening and a sincere desire for connection, but at the same time they are invaded by deep anxieties: fear of showing vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of losing freedom. These inner tensions create contradictory behaviors. One day he is affectionate and present. The next he withdraws and shuts down. A moment of tenderness can be followed by a gesture of coldness. And the woman on the receiving end often interprets this as disinterest or emotional games, when in reality she faces a psychic conflict between desire and defense. The masculine shadow, when triggered by emotional closeness, strives to keep the ego safe. And that safety is often maintained through avoidance, doubt, or criticism. He may begin to point out flaws in his partner, not because she has changed, but because he needs to slow down the pace of surrender. He may appear indecisive about the relationship, not because he lacks feeling, but because unintegrated contents within him prevent him from sustaining emotional intensity. These contradictory tests are, in truth, manifestations of resistance to transformation. Falling in love requires change, a shift in how he sees the world, relationships, and himself. And the shadow, whose role is to protect the previous identity, steps in with force. It may express itself as hidden jealousy, sudden withdrawals, or disparaging comments that undermine the bond, not because he wishes to hurt her, but because he still doesn't know how to handle the power of what he's feeling. The woman, observing these contradictions, needs to look beyond immediate behaviors. Awareness of the shadow's existence allows her to understand that these tests are not about her, but about his internal conflicts. Rather than reacting with judgment or trying to fix him, she can choose to remain clear and firm in her own truth. From that conscious stance, the bond can either mature or dissolve with dignity. It is important to emphasize that acknowledging the shadow does not mean accepting toxic or abusive behavior. There is a clear difference between someone wrestling with internal conflict and someone deliberately manipulating or disrespecting the other. Jungian consciousness teaches us that the path of love begins within ourselves. By noticing the shadow's movements in him, the woman is also invited to examine her own shadow, her expectations, her wounds, her fears of abandonment or rejection. This mirroring is a fundamental part of the individuation journey. A man's unconscious tests are not merely his challenges, they are also invitations for the woman to observe herself and stand with greater emotional maturity. Thus, the relationship ceases to be a testing ground and becomes a space of mutual growth where light and shadow can coexist in truth. Every new relationship is inevitably a territory of projections. When a man begins to fall in love, he projects onto his partner a series of images, expectations, and ideals that may have little to do with who she truly is. This projection is a profound phenomenon described by Jung as the transfer of unrecognized internal contents onto the other. In an affective context, the partner becomes a canvas on which he unconsciously inscribes emotional needs, unhealed wounds, and unfulfilled desires. These projections hold immense power because, while they draw two people close, they also distort. At first, he may idealize the woman, seeing in her qualities that directly address his emotional lack: sweetness, strength, sensitivity, embrace. Everything seems perfect, but he is not loving the real partner, but the internal image she temporarily embodies. When that idealization begins to fade, usually over small disagreements or unexpected behaviors, he enters a state of confusion. The internal image clashes with external reality, and that is when the tests appear. He starts to provoke situations that help him gauge how consistent his partner is with the image he projected. Sometimes he seeks constant reassurance. Other times he tests her emotional limits with ambiguous questions or unsettling attitudes. The unconscious is seeking confirmation. Is she really what I imagined, or just another disappointment? The test in this case is an attempt to protect the projected image, or to dismantle it in a controlled way without pain. But this attempt always generates tension, because living under projections prevents authenticity from emerging. Authenticity, in turn, threatens an ego that is not yet ready to face reality. It demands detachment from illusion. It demands recognition of the other as an autonomous being, with her own strengths and limitations. When the woman shows herself as she truly is, with her emotions, her opinions, her contradictions, the man may recoil, not out of lack of interest, but because he faces a mirror forcing him to revise his own illusions. The confrontation between ideal and real is one of the most delicate moments in emotional rapprochement. Many bonds break here, not for lack of connection, but for lack of maturity to sustain the real. A woman who wishes to remain whole in this dynamic must cultivate her own awareness. When she perceives that she is being idealized, she can gently return the projection to the man, showing who she truly is, with both firmness and vulnerability. This stance is extremely powerful because it breaks the cycle of expectation and creates room for a genuine bond. By refusing to be merely a reflection of someone else's fantasy, she invites him to relate to her essence, not to his illusion. On the male side, the awakening of consciousness happens when he realizes that his partner is not there to fill his internal voids. The process of withdrawing projections and reintegrating them into his own psyche is a crucial step in the individuation journey. By acknowledging that what he seeks in the woman is actually a part of himself that needs to be embraced, he initiates a new stage of emotional maturity. This process is painful but deeply liberating. It transforms the relationship into a field of truth, where both can exist as they are, without the need to please, test, or manipulate. Authenticity replaces unconscious power plays, and when that occurs, the tests lose their function, for the relationship ceases to be an approval ritual and becomes an experience of mutual growth and revelation. When a man begins to fall in love, the emotional bond comes to represent more than a simple connection. It becomes an opportunity to deepen his own individuation process. Jung described individuation as the path through which the individual becomes truly himself, integrating all psychic parts, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine. Love, in this sense, is not merely a romantic experience, but a journey of self-knowledge and transformation. The tests a man unconsciously imposes on his partner reveal precisely the areas of resistance in that journey. They indicate how much fear, insecurity, and internal fragmentation still linger. The fear of fully surrendering is linked not only to past traumas or emotional insecurity, but also to the difficulty of relinquishing the persona, the mask he learned to wear to survive in the world. Embracing a true commitment demands that he confront this mask and allow his essence to emerge, something that can feel profoundly threatening to the ego. True emotional commitment begins when a man recognizes that his partner is not there to validate his image, but to walk alongside him in a process of mutual discovery. It is at that point that tests lose their purpose. They cease to be unconscious evaluation strategies and become turning points, portals announcing the passage to another level of relationship, more honest, more whole, more human. That passage, however, does not occur without pain. It demands confrontation with the shadow, with idealizations, with inherited patterns and emotional automatisms. Often this process triggers intense inner crises. He may feel lost, torn between the desire to be with his partner and the impulse to retreat to preserve his autonomy. But it is precisely this tension that reveals the potential for transformation. The man who dares to walk that uncertain path, who does not hide behind tests or emotional games, begins to access a new dimension of himself. The woman, noticing this movement, is also invited to align with her own individuation. Instead of expecting the other to change or to prove his love, she focuses on sustaining her integrity. She understands that true commitment does not arise from eliminating conflicts, but from the capacity to navigate them with awareness. When both stand together in that field, conscious of their projections, attentive to their shadows, willing to integrate their internal polarities, love no longer remains an unattainable ideal, but becomes a daily practice of presence. Emotional commitment at that level no longer depends on dependency or filling gaps, but on a genuine desire to share the path. The tests that once seemed obstacles reveal themselves as symbolic trials of a deeper calling, the call to love wholeheartedly. And that love does not demand perfection, but rather courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to acknowledge personal limits, to make space for the other's growth. It is in that emotional maturity that individuation manifests as a creative force within the relationship. The man stops fearing surrender because he no longer sees love as a threat to his identity, but as a bridge to his wholeness. He realizes he does not lose himself by committing. Instead, he reveals himself. And the woman, remaining true to her own journey, does not submit to his tests but transforms them into steps of awareness. Thus, the relationship becomes a shared field of individuation, where two whole, conscious, ever-evolving beings build a bond that transcends the ego and anchors in the soul. In that space, tests cease, not because everything is resolved, but because they are no longer necessary. True love no longer needs proof. It sustains itself in the real presence of those willing to see and be seen fully. Throughout this video, we have explored the invisible backstage of nascent love. We have discovered that when a man begins to fall in love, the tests he imposes are not merely rational actions or conscious manipulations. They are profound expressions of his psyche in motion. Through Jungian concepts of anima, shadow, projection, and individuation, we understand that true love is born not on the surface, but in the deepest layers of the unconscious. When both partners become aware of these mechanisms, it becomes possible to transform the bond into a space of mutual growth, where tests cease to be threats and become opportunities. The relationship then is not a proving ground, but a laboratory of the soul, where every encounter reveals something essential about who we are. If this content helped you see beyond appearances and grasp the depth of effective bonds, subscribe now to the channel, and don't forget to activate the bell to receive upcoming videos. Also click on the video appearing on the screen now. It will take you even deeper on this journey of self-knowledge and inner transformation. Remember, true love begins when we choose to see ourselves whole and to see the other the same way.